All right, here we go. Don't you dare be eating my headphones again. What are you doing? Get down. Get down. Shucks. Ugh. Weather Center Willow acting up again. Hello everybody joining in. We're going to get started here in a moment. We have, I won't say huge news to talk about, but we've got some pretty interesting up-and-comings out in the tropics tonight. So we're definitely going to get into that. Before we get to 8 o'clock, I'm going to open up my little brewski. It's Friday night, so we gotta do it right. How's everybody doing? Let's see, have they changed this yet? Nope, still 20%. Some gradual development of this system is possible. Thereafter, while the system moves westward. It is Friday. Shoot, at least I hope it's Friday. I'm over here celebrating, getting all hyped up. Pretty sure it's Friday. Shoot, today's been such a lopsided day. It started off horrendously. I woke up, usual 4 a.m. wake-up call, and was all set to go to the gym, was pumped. Today was going to be a legs and shoulders workout, and at about the 4:30 mark, I went out to my car and realized I didn't have my keys. So I went back inside the house and searched all over the place. I'm talking, I turned this place upside down trying to find my keys. And long story short, I broke into my own car to try to find the keys. It took me an hour and 30 minutes to jerry-rig something to break into that damn thing, just to find out that they weren't even in the car. They were actually in here at Weather Center, buried underneath a bunch of mail that I'd brought in a few days ago. I see some folks already talking about the GFS. Don't buy into that. Whatever you do, don't buy into that. We were starting to see a little bit of consistency in terms of the GFS run-to-run trying to pop something out over the Central and Western Caribbean. And then all of a sudden at 18Z, we went from taking a look at it on the 23rd, 24th, all the way to the 28th. So, shoot, I wish it was in my pocket. Damaged my window tint and left a couple dents in the A-pillar. I don't want to say this, but the protection at the east coast of Florida is going to shift. Yep, no, you're right. That's exactly what today's Weather Center episode was about. We're going to talk about that a little bit more casually. I know I had to kind of bust through the video and explain it in layman's terms real quick, but tonight we'll talk a bit about that once we get in there. So it's 8:01. We'll give it a few more minutes. I started a little early tonight. I figured why not? And then we'll brush through everything once we get a few more folks in here. But Miss Laya, please forgive me if I butcher your name, Miss Laya Janelle, that's exactly what I was alluding to earlier. Now that Lee and Margot are in such a high latitude and Nigel, once 15 can develop further, gets sucked out, we're going to hit the reset button for those of you who used to play GameCube and Nintendo 64 back in the day. We're going to hard reset the console and everything's going to go back to the way it was, sort of. There's a caveat to that. But yeah, how's everybody doing? Supercharas, today is Friday. Hype. We gotta hype it up. That's the one thing I'm willing to hype. All the hype for Friday. All the hype in the weekend. Everybody else can yell at me about fear-mongering. I'm Friday-mongering right now. It is Friday night, and I get to spend it with all you lovely people. And thank you for taking some time out of your Friday night to tune in. Friday, September 15th. September is going to be gone before we know it. Hi, Danny. Welcome in. Good to see you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Always a pleasure to have you. Friday hype. Friday night hype. Friday night hype fest. Nancy, hi there from Orlando. Neighbors. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. I can't believe it's already September 15th, though. Wow. We are already technically past the official peak of the hurricane season. We're on, like, the downward descent now. We went up and up and up and up, Shikra, or whichever roller coaster of your preference, and now we're coming back down the other side. We're already starting to, I won't say we're coming down. We're like, you ever go on those roller coasters where you're up, 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 and there's like that little shift, and then you go down? That's kind of where we're at right now. We're at that little shift. We're just barely shifting. So that's where you get the first loop. So that's kind of why we'll see what happens out in the tropics, because experience serves me. Anytime we're on a weird real iron Gwazi, heck yeah, Gwazi and Montu are legit. Busch Gardens is easily my favorite theme park here in Florida. I like Universal, I like Disney and all that, but in terms of actual roller coasters, hands down Busch Gardens. Northport, Florida got a lot of rain in 2 hours this evening finally. Yeah, we're gonna see rain chances go up. We'll talk about that as well. We're gonna get that frontal system to push way down through the south. I feel like Ophelia will be the worst storm of the season. I have a menacing feeling about the name. I feel like it's going to affect a lot of the Gulf and affect the East Coast. Maybe. Let's not go conjuring anything just yet. Everything is still hypothetical. What we are seeing is the first piece of the puzzle, and that being the synoptic scale pattern starting to set up, to favor a westward movement of a storm. So we'll have to watch this. We'll have to see what happens. It goes without saying, and I'll get my Epic pen going so that way I'm not just pointing at the screen. But it goes without saying that I have the utmost confidence, and a lot of us who have been talking behind the scenes agree that 15 and Nigel is just going to go straight up like that, regardless. I mean, I know that some of the ensembles we'll take a look at still have it spreading out a little bit, could wander a bit further to the west, could wander more to the east, but one thing's for certain, we're not really going to have to worry about Nigel. Nigel's definitely going to be more of a fish storm. In fact, he might actually be a textbook fish storm if he can stay far enough to the east of the 60-degree west longitude line. If I have my viewers from Bermuda tuning in tonight, we're definitely still keeping an eye on you. I definitely don't want to forget about you guys. As long as it can stay to the east, even if it be 50 to 100 miles... We live this here in Bermuda. We live this here in... Brad Campbell, welcome in. Why are you always hyping storms? I haven't even hyped anything. The only thing I've hyped tonight is Friday. It's the only thing I've been hyping tonight. Storm stronger than Lee? No, not anymore. I don't think so. Conditions are favorable to continue to see some major hurricane activity out there, especially since the Caribbean and the Gulf are untapped in terms of ocean heat content and, just surface temperatures, but I don't think we're going to see anybody go head-to-head with Lee's intensity. Nigel might become a Cat 4. I think peak will be 104. That's just based on the most recent runs of everything. Even the high-res hurricane models, the HAFS A and B, H-Wharf and all that, they're calling for more of like a Cat 3. I'm putting my money on a nice Category 2, Category 3 storm before shooting out into the central and northern Atlantic. I don't think we're going to get a major system. Will it go over those upwelled waters? Yes. Are some people over-exaggerating how upwelled the waters are? I definitely think so. I did the conversions, and with the most recent surface or sea surface charts, they've definitely decreased in temperature. Now that Lee kind of evaporated all that good OHC out of that, but we're still well above the margin to see intensification if a tropical cyclone were to roll over it. I've heard some people even mention that with that ocean heat content being tapped and them being a little cooler in that general area, people are actually mentioning that it'll weaken, and I don't think it'll be like that. It's not like we've dropped into the 70s or anything like that. We just went from the not the upper 90s. We just went from the 90s down to the low 80s, and we all know we only need about 80 to 82 degrees to sustain a tropical storm. So Lee was the lucky storm that took advantage of it really was, actually. Yeah, Ethan's life, I do agree with that. Lee was definitely lucky. A lot of our models predicted that rapid intensification, but if you guys remember, a lot of the models were still anticipating that that storm would stay strong all the way up until it started to make its move towards the north. And that didn't happen. It exploded. It literally nuked itself. And when I say that, I genuinely mean it. It blew up, and then it just couldn't maintain. A lot of folks still blame the shear and, the upwelling from Franklin, and honestly, I don't think that was really it. I think it's just because, if you guys had tuned into previous Weather Center live streams, I go back to the old metaphor, high horsepower builds. You're going to get one or two good runs down the track with them until you're going to have to do maintenance for an extended period of time because something's going to break. And I think that's exactly what we saw with Hurricane Lee, and he just never got recovered. Yes, Aunt Willow 7 Wilma will remain the anomaly for the Caribbean. 882 millibars. Blew up, but then she was also another one who once, especially when she got into the Yucatan, really dissipated and was nothing more than a Cat 1 when she came through Florida. Lifelong F-ups, yeah, he's always hyping. I mean, I'm hyped up right now. It's Friday, I'm drinking a brew, talking to everybody. Bermuda survived okay, just a lot of power outages. That's very good to hear, Carolyn. I'm thankful for that. I kind of figured that you guys weren't going to see too much, mainly because it continues to weaken. And even now, there's some people out there mentioning that Lee is expanding and this is going to be a very dangerous situation. And don't get me wrong, you could get yourself into a bad situation if you put yourself in one. But in all reality, with as much as Lee is weakening, I don't really think it's going to be that substantial. Even the storm surge threat and the high waves have really diminished quite rapidly, and NHC is predicting that we won't see anything more than a couple feet worth of storm surge on the eastern side of it. Wilma was a Cat 3 when it hit. Was it a Cat 3? I could have sworn it was only a Cat 1. I thought it had weakened down pretty crazy and had a huge eye. It was a very expansive storm, albeit still tropical, unlike Lee right now. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was still a major hurricane. I don't know. I could have sworn it was a weakened one, though, because it came through so fast. It was moving like 20-plus miles per hour. You're really bad about hyping up storms. It's really nothing. Wait, Savannah, are you being serious? I'm not hyping anything up. I'm mentioning, as a matter of fact, right now that Hurricane Lee is going to be better than what a lot of us were predicting earlier this week. And there's still some folks out there who's actually saying it's going to be bad and, very dangerous, and I don't see that at all. I've even seen the terminology life-threatening and all this other stuff, and I think that's more hype than anything. When it will hit, I'm reading the old comments, excuse me. Pregnancy during, I was pregnant during Wilma, and it was horrible. That must have been wild. Thankfully, that was a storm that was in and out quick. She came, had a little bit of a coffee break, and then was out. Dudes D will definitely break down GFS. It's 8:10. We'll start getting in there. And a Cat 4 when it hit the Yucatan. Yes, she did weaken down. I remember that. She definitely weakened down before hitting the Yucatan, thankfully, because that would have been that right there. Y'all can say hype. But when you have an 882 millibar hurricane, that is catastrophic. That is destruction to all living heck. Any prediction about Florida, Orlando area? Nothing yet. Laiba. Forgive me if I'm butchering that as well. Nothing yet. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment, though. Let's get in here now. I'll answer comments as we continue to move along. I still want to know if, Savannah, you're serious about hyping, because the last few videos, I really haven't hyped anything. Clayton, I don't think you're hyping anything, maybe a little bit. You're just excited. That's really all it is. I've never met a person who's passionate about something and they're not excited to talk about it. That's just me. I'm going to give you the same kind of energy if we talk about cars and workouts and scary movies. It's going to be the same thing. Again, if you've ever met someone who's bored and, whenever they're talking about something that they're deeply in love with, either they're not in love and fascinated by it or they're lying. Google says one was a cat there. Maybe it was. Maybe, whatchamacallit? 182 millibar hurricane. I didn't say, what? I didn't say that. I said 882 millibar hurricane back in '05. Wilma in October. You guys can fact check me on that. Robert, thank you for double checking with Google. I was very young back then. I was only 14 years old when Wilma came through, so you're very well probably right. I just remember in Central Florida, I was outside for a while when Hurricane Wilma came through, and it was gone. It was like an afternoon thunderstorm. That's how fast it raced off through there. Thank you, Miss Laya. I appreciate that. And that's another thing, too, is like 9 times out of 10, before we get in here, I just want to say, weather, if we're being honest, we're like a special type of community. Weather is something that a lot of folks, they'll whip out their phone and is it going to rain today? Can I go out tonight? Can I go get lit? And that's it. No one really, takes it a second glance. So you have to have a little bit of excitement and try to, bring a little energy to the table. And I'm not saying energy in terms of, it's a bad hurricane, we're all going to die. I'm just, I'm not going to sit here and Bueller. No one's going to watch. Were you around during Charlie Francis Jean? Yes, Clayton. Charlie was what instigated it for me. I watched Twister when I was about 5 years old, and I kind of wanted to get into weather. And then when Charlie hit and how phenomenal that storm, well, I shouldn't say phenomenal, but how just wicked that storm was, and the different phenomena that we saw in Central Florida, it just took me by storm, all puns intended. 182. Yeah, honestly, Gabriel, you're right. 182 millibar, that would cause a crater in the Caribbean. We wouldn't be here right now. There'd be some kind of destabilization in the atmosphere at that point. Can you please say your gut about the new storm in Africa for South Florida? Right now, digital dentistry, it's too far out. Too far out. We got to make sure that we continue to watch the pattern. Today's episode kind of really delved into that. We're seeing a huge transition. You know what? We'll get in there. I'm going to stop ranting and raving. We'll talk a little bit. So Hurricane Lee is right on the cusp of becoming a tropical storm at this point. We're down to 80 mile per hour winds and 965 millibars in the center of circulation. So he's continuing to rapidly dissipate. We're seeing about like a 5 to 8 millibar filling trend every single time we check in. It seems like every 12 to 18 hours. So he's not going to play that much of a role in terms of what the Northeast is going to see. Earlier this week, I'll tell you, I may have been guilty of hyping a little bit, but that's only because a lot of our long-range models were still calling for a potential Cat 2 storm, if not greater, to hit up there. And that's the only reason I was, mentioning everything that I was. But now, looking at the live data and what's to come and the trends we've been seeing, it's very safe to say, could it still be dangerous? Yes, if you put yourself in harm's way. Not saying that this storm is going to come tearing everything up, but if you go out of your way to put yourself in a bad situation, like with anything, something's bound to happen. Margot's also rapidly weakening. She's filled almost 20 some odd millibars in the last 24 hours. She's finally on her way out, undergoing cyclolysis now that she's up over the cooler waters of the North Atlantic. And then 15, we're trying our best. 15... it's come a long way. 15 was very disorganized the last few days, and then finally, once it could get away from that trough and that shear that was really stretching it out, it's kind of like a resistance band doing this. Now we're starting to see the consolidation, and we could get some deepening over the next couple days, and I do think we'll see Nigel here very soon. So if I refer to Nigel, I'm talking about Tropical Depression 15. I think this season will top out at 21-10-6. That's a good call. I mean, we're definitely working our way down. It's really going to depend on what October brings for us. It's pretty guaranteed we're going to see Ophelia. Some of the ensembles are hinting towards maybe seeing Felipe. Maybe that's a big, listen closely, it's a big maybe. Like I'm putting a lot of animated emphasis on that. Maybe. But right now, it's almost guaranteed that Ophelia is going to pop up too, especially now that NHC is tracking this 20% chance. I think we'll definitely see that go up once we get through Sunday and into parts of Monday. All right, this is what we have on the satellite imagery tonight. You can see that Hurricane Lee, I honestly am surprised it even has any tropical characteristics still with it. It's looking so messed up, and that's looking very almost Bear Clinic style system at this point. You see all that dry air coming in. Let me change the pen. I always do that. Let me use a pen you guys can actually see. Right along the southern periphery of it, look at all that dry air. And I know that we typically hear dry air and we think, dust and, just traditional dry air, no moisture. In this case, what's happening is we have the interaction between our polar high that's been modifying over the northeast and parts of James Bay, Ontario, and all that, they're starting to merge, and this is exactly what I wanted to talk about during my video today, and I even broke into my live stream on Instagram earlier today to talk about this, because this is what's going to help to create chaos in our upper air pattern. You can kind of see back in through here, too. Look at the similarities between that deep occluded low and what we have going on with Hurricane Lee right now. They're almost like clockwork, kind of running in unison with each other right now, with the jet coming through that system and then the jet digging into this system, and then very hard to see, but you can see we have another comma cloud feature up over here over southern Greenland, trying to highlight it. It's on the upper periphery of this chart. Here is Tropical Depression 15, still, you know, I mean, it's trying its best. It really is. And, you know, it's getting better organized, but I still feel like it's taking its time. You look closely at it, and we're not really seeing a whole lot of turning with it. We're seeing consolidation in the thunderstorm activity, so we're finally getting that igniting, but there really isn't a whole lot of, you know, organized, concentrated spin to it. You can kind of see the same thing happening with Margot up here. Look at how that cold polar air is finally working its way in around that system. We're getting that mid-level dry air around it. This is what everyone's been talking about recently, though. Look at how fired up the Pacific monsoonal trough is once again. And I'm seeing the comments popping off. Brad, I'm not hyping up anything. I'm just explaining that everything, you know, what could take shape and what the big picture pattern is doing for us. That's honestly, if you want to call it hype, this is just hype. Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyways, what I'm hyping really is just the fact that we're going to be switching the upper air pattern. And that's what's a little more concerning if we get something to pop off in this port, like kind of where Tropical Depression 15 and where some of our models have been hinting towards something happening in the Caribbean. Let's go over to Tropical Tidbits. We'll go to the 12Z Euro now that we have it all the way in. We'll go North Atlantic, and believe it or not, we're actually going to go to 200 millibars. We're going to go all the way up. Hurricanes are fascinating, beautiful, and terrifying. Been through enough. All of them are very unique, but tornadoes scare the crap out of me. You never know when it will just drop down and take you. Elite Chief Stark, I agree. That's the only piece of weather I have yet to come face to face with. I've ridden out, I want to say, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll say about a dozen hurricanes. I've been through sandstorms, both in the Southwest. I was that guy who, I was coming back from Las Vegas, as a matter of fact, and I got hit by a really bad dust storm on my way between Phoenix and Tucson. And, of course, being who I am, I jumped on camera and I'm like, I'm going outside in it, and I regretted that immediately. Luckily, I was in a rental car because that thing got saturated and caked with dust. During my time in the Middle East, we had blackout conditions during the intense sandstorms out there. That's a dangerous situation. If you want hype, that's crazy. 40, 50 knot winds, 120 degree temperatures, and then no visibility to the point where we're blocking out the sun. Day turns to night. That's how dense the sandstorms are. I've been through blizzards, obviously thunderstorms and high winds. I've been hailed on, close lightning strikes, you know, the works. Just not a tornado yet. I've only seen a funnel cloud. Are we going to get out of our drought? Slowly but surely. The Hive, where are you located? Just to kind of confirm with you. Does this pattern shift happen every year? Not like this, Maddie. Excellent question. Very good question. Not like this, and that's why I'm kind of raising awareness to it. Typically, this is the type of long wave pattern we see when we're in the heart of like December, January, and we're starting to really consistently cool off with temperatures down in the south and the southeast. You know, when Florida's kind of sitting comfortable in the upper 70s, low 80s. To see the jet come way far down to the south, that's all because of Nigel and Lee, regardless. And I'll tell you exactly why I feel that way. So anyways, we'll go through time. You can see here's our trough kicking Lee out of the picture. It's going to build our ridge. We have that good shared energy region between the difluence associated with Lee and our jet max that's working its way through the base of that trough to the apex of our ridge. You're going to see that ridge build up and then finally eject Lee out. Here's our next trough that's going to finally finish the job, pull him out to the east, no harm, no foul. The thing is, at the surface level, what's happening with Lee is, as I mentioned on the water vapor, we have all that enhanced cold air advection coming out. Let me go to, there was a wonderful chart on weathermodels.com. The 10-meter winds did an excellent job of highlighting that. I used it in my video today. Let's go over to ECMWMF. We'll go to United States, whole United States, and then where's our 10-meter wind? Here we go, 10-meter wind. So take a look at this chart here. You can see that. I'll start doing some drawing. Here's our high pressure still over the lower Great Lakes, northeast, kind of helping to sustain our cold air advection. As we all know, there's good old Lee. He's moving off in this general direction. And what's happening is Mother Nature doesn't discriminate against what does what, okay? If you guys are any at all fitness enthusiasts in here, Arnold Schwarzenegger made a great comparison when talking about, muscles and strength training. The body's not going to care if you're lifting a barbell, if you're lifting dumbbells, if you're lifting kettlebells, cables, you name it. As long as you're doing, resistance training, you're still exercising and you're going to reap the benefits. It's the same concept here. Tropical cyclone, hurricane, low pressure, mature wave, winter storm, whatever spin we have in the atmosphere is going to move air. It's going to move temperatures. And what's happening is Lee is essentially acting like what we would see in the winter time. A very deep, occluded nor'easter coming across the northeast, bringing cold air down to the south. If it were December, January, February, we'd see snow with it. Luckily, we're not, because then that'd be a little bit of a different picture. So what's happening is all the cold air, and I'll pull up another chart that I was using earlier to show you guys, just so you're following all this hot air I'm spewing at you. We'll go to the Canadian model, because the Canadian model does an excellent job at highlighting this, but here's our 850 temperature anomaly, and you see all that cold air that's over the east? This is right about where we are now. Or no, excuse me, this is day before. If you look at this anomaly right here, that's your high pressure and your stagnant cold front down at the surface. And if you watch, here's Lee, still warm core. Notice how the warmest temps are right in his center. That's tropical. As you go through time, look at what happens to that cold. See that? Really fast, too. You go only 2 panels into the future, and look at all that cold air getting sucked down off the southeast and off the mid-Atlantic states around his west and southern periphery. So what's happening is, even though National Hurricane Center, and I'm sure there's probably still some indications that he has a warm core center, you can kind of see it on this chart, there's still warm air entrenched in his circulation. But what's happening is we're evolving. He's turning more baroclinic, and eventually he's going to rapidly transition to a barotropic low. And as you go through time, take a look at what all that cold air does. It gets pulled way offshore. Here's that next system I mentioned earlier, that next trough, and Lee's only going to exacerbate that. Look at how far south that front's going to go. And this is 850 millibars. They're stacked. So even though it stops right here, down at the surface, they tend to stack 2 to 3 degrees out ahead of their upper level fronts. So we'll have a front surging as far south as maybe the Florida Keys, central to southern Gulf of Mexico, and that's a little abnormal for this time of year. Usually by the time we get into October and November, we start to see more rigorous fronts coming down through the south. And that's what Lee's doing. As you go through time, watch this. You get Nigel out there in the Atlantic. He's just off the chart. He's over here. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can expand this a little bit. We'll go North America. There we go. So Lee is done and gone. You can see him ejecting out over this way. Whoops, I didn't get my pen. You see him ejecting out over here. There's Nigel now, and we still have that cold pool off the mid-Atlantic and the southeast coast. So as that gets pulled off with Nigel, now look at where all that cold air is. It's well off into the Atlantic. And now we have warm air entrenched over the central parts of the United States because of how it's created this lopsided appearance in the pattern. You see that? We're still at 850 millibars, but if you were to look at it three-dimensionally, I'll use my yellow ink so it stands out. This would be where our trough is, all kind of wigged out and bent down to the southwest. Our ridge would be kind of toppling like this, and then we have another trough and a cutoff low pushing into the west coast. And if I go back to our jet level chart right here, look at how crazy this pattern looks. So we're sitting here right now, there's a normal pattern, there goes Nigel coming in to finish the job, and look at what happens. Look at that distortion in the pattern. And this is 12Z now. I haven't really looked at this, and that looks even more extreme. We have a trough all the way down into the Western Caribbean, pumping some difluents and some potential thunderstorm and moisture activity for parts of you in Cuba, Jamaica, even maybe areas closer to Haiti, Dominican Republic, maybe. I mean, this isn't a moisture chart. This is upper level. But take a look at what's also happening. Because of what Lee and Nigel have done to disturb the pattern, we have what we used to hate. It was an analyst's nightmare in synoptic analysis. We have split flow of the jet. The jet's going down to the south, the jet's flowing across, albeit weak, and it's also going across James Bay, Hudson Bay through Canada. So we have weird stuff going on with our jet pattern, and as a result, because we have such a deep trough trying to push its way into the Caribbean and the Gulf, take a look at what's happening over the West Atlantic. We have this ridge ballooning up. And if we go over to the GFS, I know a lot of you guys have been waiting for me to do that, you transition over to the GFS, look at that huge ridge that builds up over the East Coast. And the reason this is concerning, and the reason why I mentioned that if we do get something to form up in the Caribbean, further out to sea, this trough originally was here. And that's what was picking our storms up and throwing, our systems out to sea. It was kind of like our protective blister. Our trough is now out over the central Atlantic. So the only case in point we'd have something sucked back out to sea not posing a threat would be if it formed essentially right over here, either on Africa or just offshore of Africa. That's the only time we'd get something to advect north like that. And as we all know, we've seen indications that our source regions are going to be out in this area and maybe even out over here. Look, even at this point in time on the GFS, you have a big anticyclone over the Caribbean. So that's not good. We have that upward vertical motion going on. So that's what I was talking about during my video today. We have our trough out in this direction now. So our safe zone, the weakness, is way out in the eastern Atlantic. And the only other weakness in place now is over the central plains. And why do I say that that's concerning? Because of the weakness that we've been watching that helped with Lee, that's going to help with Nigel, with Margot, and even Franklin technically, because Franklin came up and just shot out to sea as well after hitting the Caribbean. That's what sucked him out. The weakness was originally right there, where that ridge is, driving our storms out. So if I leave that box there, and I put this one here, anything that forms in that general area here is going to have no choice but to go this way. Period. And this is going to hang around for a little while, because what happens is when you have such huge, sharp amplitude features, whether it be a trough or a ridge that really builds in amplitude, and we get those wavelengths to get to such great extremes, that's why we use the terminology blocking pattern, because what it does is it slows the pattern down. If we had more easy-going west to east flow, everything's just going to keep trucking along, everything's going to move like it should, it'll be fine. But when you have such a huge blocking ridge like this, that really balloons up like that, see, eventually it's going to punch through and we're going to get a return to form. But we'll have this set up from this weekend all the way through the beginning of October-ish. And even this right here is a little concerning, because even though we're starting to return back to that zonal flow, our trough is still out here. So all of our systems would want to get picked up over the eastern Atlantic. So if anything forms even at this point in time as we roll into October, they're still going to want to go west. There's not going to be that big influence along the coast to drive them up and away from us. If you go forward, GFS is a strong hurricane by Cuba. Yeah, I remember you saying this a while back too. Anything forms is going into the Gulf. Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm bringing awareness to it. And I want to make a video solely talking about this, because this was a hypothetical scenario that I popped up, and a week later or so, it's coming out. It's coming to be. So now the big kicker, the key here is if we get something to form. Ophelia, coming off of Africa when she is, may still have the opportunity to move north. It's going to be a big game of kind of just playing guess who at that point. I know you guys want to look at this. I don't agree with it at all. If Brad is still in here, or whoever was saying I was hyping earlier, you can hype this. I don't agree with this at all. GFS has a big storm blooming up in the Caribbean right there and then pushing up towards parts of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. That right there I do not agree with. This I agree with, whatever that is. I think that's Ophelia, as a matter of fact. Let me go ahead and delete everything. So this guy out here in the Caribbean, I'm not saying we won't see development, but in this case, that Category 2 hurricane, I don't believe that. We'd had a huge break in continuity, and that just doesn't add up. This right here, though, that makes sense. See how we're driving it to the west? That makes a lot more sense, and I can get behind that, because I'm pretty sure that's Ophelia, yeah. Ophelia comes off of Africa and then just moves due west. Look at all that high pressure situated over the central Atlantic. We're finally getting that big ridge popping up, so that's what's going to drive the storms westward. We'll zoom in a little bit on Florida real quick, too. I want to address something before everyone else panics and thinks, you hyping? This thing right here, that entity, that's not going to be tropical. That right there, that's not a depression. That's not anything tropical. That's definitely baroclinic. Canadian model once again did an excellent job of demonstrating that. If you look closely, we have our pressure gradient here, and we have very little barbed red lines going across like that. Those are isotherms. Those are lines of equal temperature, just like we have isobars, lines of equal pressure. And as you go through time, you see that system start to develop. Take a look at how, even though it has very weak gradients with it, you can see that we have cold air advection occurring down here. The isotherms are being pulled across Florida, and then we have isotherms moving to the north, so we have warm air surging to the north. And if I hold this image right here and go up to the upper levels, 250, see how the jet's running all over it? So with the jet running over top of it in a shortwave trough at 500, that's why we're seeing kind of atypical cyclogenesis. And this system right here is also going to play a role in what Ophelia does as we go through time. This could either be our saving grace and open up another weakness along the East Coast and kick her on out, or what'll end up happening is if it rides north, the jet digging in around it will change the AOI again. The jet digging in around it could amplify our ridge here and drive her further west. So it's back and forth. It's kind of a huge crumple up a piece of paper, rip it up and throw it up in the air, because if this system rides to the north with this split flow and tries to reassociate itself with the main branch of the polar front jet, which is kind of up in here and through here, that's where we have to kind of make a determination. This model run, if I'm not mistaken, has it, going due north, and see how it wants to build the ridge over the western Atlantic? That is a little concerning. That wants to move this system here more to the west. It might recurve at the last second, or it could continue to push on in, depending on how long this trough axis kicks it out there. Because even though hurricanes don't like troughs, it's not like they're just going to boomerang out if it's stagnant. If we have that blocking pattern in there, the steering current's going to be a little iffy. So this is the Canadian model. We can technically take a look at the likes of the GFS and make a different determination, but I don't know if I trust GFS going that far out into the future. See, we have that huge ridge over the west, over the western Atlantic, and there goes that one storm forming up in the Caribbean. Now, one thing I will admit, just because I don't agree with the GFS bringing a random Cat 2 hurricane through the Caribbean, doesn't mean I'm ruling out any kind of development. Because one thing I've been watching closely are the GEPs, the Canadian ensembles, and they did an absolutely glorious job with Idalia. Everybody else was talking, nothing's happening, blah, 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 blah. But the Canadian model was calling for Idalia's formation for a solid 9 days. I counted 9 days before she finally came up into the Western Caribbean and deepened down. And one trend that's still consistent, for those of you who watched on Wednesday, we still have Canadian model. See that? Lower pressure. We have one little weak entity right there, right about the same time that GFS was hinting at something, right in through there on the Canadian ensembles. Both the Canadian and GFS ensembles were picking up on something trying to mess around in the Central Caribbean and move north. So we have two different models kind of, whispering in our ears that we might just need to at least pay attention to the Caribbean. Robert, I know you mentioned earlier that the gyre getting active again is a little concerning. I agree. Nothing's concrete yet. But if you go forward in time even more so, take a look at what the ensembles continue to do. See that? That's been trending. And we actually have a little bit more agreement as of 12 Zulu. Right at the start of October. And if you go back in time, you can verify this. At 0Z, there it is. Just a little bit off to the east. If you go to 12Z, there it is. If you go back to 0Z, there it is. If you go to 12Z on Wednesday, there it is. I mean, it's been there. And this is exactly what we saw with Idalia, and I started talking about it, and next thing you know, there she is, making landfall in Florida. So it's something worth watching. As I mentioned in my Instagram live stream and earlier today in my Weather Center video, I'm not raising alarms. I'm not saying I'm concerned and I'm worried calling it. I'm just saying, CPC's looking at it. Models are looking at it, so we have an official source on top of some good model data indicating that it's worth investigating. And I think that during the middle parts of next week, we'll have a bit of a better indication because we'll be, 3 to 5 days a little further in advance than we are now. Right now, we're still so far out. I mean, you could kind of say, actually, you know what? I'll throw myself under the bus and say you can kind of say I'm hyping because we're going way out to the end of our ensembles to try to find this thing. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because of the track record. With Idalia, it was the same thing. I was going all the way out to the end of the run, and I kept consistently seeing those ensembles trying to swing something north. And now that CPC, Climate Prediction Centers, mentioned we could see some formation down there, our models are also singing the same tune. It's not a guarantee. I'm still giving it a very low threat chance. I'm saying like 10-15% chance we could see something form, 85-90% chance we won't. Until we get some more agreement. But the GFS ensembles are also pinging on it as well as you go through time. You can see all that low pressure. That looks scary, actually. Good Lord. 18Z's like, we're all in. We're getting hit. But, yeah. I'll go to 12Z. 12Z is a little more trustworthy. But you go to 12 Zulu, and you can see that at the very end of it, GFS is calling for the same thing. So we have really good unison between the Canadian and the GFS. I don't think the Euro ensembles are picking up on anything yet. Let's go ahead and take a look. And I see you guys talking snow. We're not there yet. We're starting to see some higher terrain snow over the Pac Northwest and the Great Basin Central Rockies, where mainly higher terrain. We're starting to see that freezing level come down, which is very indicative of our transition season from summer to fall. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Let's see. This is 12Z Euro ensembles. Let's take a look at what we got here. So there goes Nigel. Pretty good agreement. Bermuda, we're still going to watch. I mean, general consensus is we could see a Cat 1 moving east of your location, but I'm still going to keep an eye out because we still have good member agreement that we could see an even stronger system move over Bermuda. That's the concerning part. To the east of Bermuda, you have all of our low-grade Cat 1 ensembles, and then right over top Bermuda, we have Cat 2-ish, kind of borderline major hurricane going over top of you. So I'm definitely not going to leave you out of the loop. I'm going to keep watching regardless of the jogs and all that. And there goes Ophelia coming off of Africa. Even the Euro wants to really try to push some things off to the west and get it into the Caribbean a little bit. And actually, you know what? We do have a couple of ensembles, albeit only a very small cluster, trying to form something up in the Caribbean. So, I'm not going to say that Euro is on board or we can use it as evidence, because that's very hit or miss. It's been very finicky. Euro and GFS were one of the last ones to pick up on Idalia before she started to come up. Icon was kind of calling it. Canadian model was just beating it like a dead horse. Something's forming until finally everything else caught up. So I'm not really going to use this as support or anything like that. It's just worth looking at. I keep watching the trends. That's what it's all about, trends. When it comes to forecasting storms that aren't even there yet, you got to, look at the trends. Brad Campbell, nice to see you come over to the light side. I appreciate you, dude. Not really worried about Florida, but if we do get something to develop, it's worth, paying attention to. Because the way the pattern's starting to situate itself, and climatologically speaking, as a few folks have already alluded to, this is typically where we see a change from Atlantic back to closer to home. So anything that does, and I'll use this chart as an example, anything that does fire off right in through here is definitely going to be problematic. Definitely. I'm not going to say where because, things could change in terms of what's happening over the U.S. and the Gulf and even out in the Atlantic, but anything that forms right in through here, and I'll even say a little further to the east, anything that comes together right about there, somebody's going to feel it, for sure. Something's going to feel it. 12Z GFS has been, or I should say the GFS in general has been very consistent with trying to form something in the Caribbean. It's been very, I wouldn't say aggressive about it, but it's been very on the ball with trying to pick something up. That's 18Z, so we're still calling for some kind of development. You can make a case that the GFS still wants to form something up at about the 23rd, 24th, because even though we don't have a low stamp, it looks like it's trying to indicate some kind of little spinning feature right in through there. You can see that precip field starts in the South Caribbean and then works its way towards the Yucatan, and then you get a closed low right in through there. So GFS is hinting, and it's just struggling because we're way out in the run, and I anticipate it's going to keep doing that, like I said, until maybe middle to latter part of next week we'll get a better consensus on what's happening. Even this right here, it's been very consistent with forming something up kind of in the same source region as Adalia, but I don't really agree with this depiction. This is a little weird, and that's exactly what we saw with Adalia, and we saw that it messed up. A lot of the models were pinging on Adalia going stationary like that, and it didn't do that. It definitely went totally different. So, in my honest opinion, with this baroclinic system forming right here, you can see the precip band to the south is indicative of that trough, that cold air, and then high pressure all in through here. I don't see, and I'm not hyping, I promise I'm not hyping. I don't see it going stationary. You see how the rest of the rainfall is getting pulled off in this general direction? That's where I see it going. If you go back to even 0Z, see that? If you go back to 0Z, it forms up in that same spot, and then ba-bam, right there. That's very reminiscent of Ian's track. And then there goes Ophelia coming in, and that makes sense. See how it could push west, and then once we get that storm to move through, create a bit of an open channel like Nigel and Lee, it moves to the north, and they form up and sing Kumbaya. That's what I've been afraid of, is anything that forms in that general area is going to have a chance to make landfall somewhere along the southeast. And this I agree with. With that baroclinic system forming over the Bahamas, kind of parts of Florida, it's going to create that channeling, that weakness up towards the Florida Peninsula. Mark my words, I'm telling you guys. Call it hype, do whatever you want. I'm standing firm in that. I've seen it enough times to understand what I'm looking at, and I understand synoptic analysis, and that's just what I'm seeing. All hypothetical, guys. All hypothetical. This is La La Land. I'm just talking about trends and breadcrumbs right now. Way too early to say anything, haven't even formed. Exactly, that's why I mentioned earlier, we just want to use trends, we want to use our ensembles, and just see how much agreement we can come up with, and that'll help with, anticipating in terms of probability. It's all hypothetical, it's just a theory right now. Ian 2.0, let's not get ahead of the game, Ethan. That track looks very reminiscent of it. I do see something like that happening, especially with that trough. I mean, you guys got to remember, I showed you the upper air pattern, and we have that trough dug in that far south. So any storm that forms right there is going to want to just shoot right out to sea. That trough could even be a saving grace. It'll impact the Caribbean, but it might dodge Florida and go for the Bahamas. Because with that anomalous trough dug in as far south as it is, let me go back to the upper air chart. I'll show you guys. Yeah, see that? With that trough dug in so far to the south, anything in this general area is just going to want to whoop and swoop out. It's going to want to make a run for it because all that cold air so far to the south, it's not going to want to move west. That's why I don't agree with what 12Z did. 12Z did something weird. It stopped it in its tracks right there and then pushes it into Mexico, and I don't agree with that. I don't really agree with what the GFS is doing there, and the reason being is if you look closely over the United States, which is why I'm a huge advocate for looking upstream and using the surface analysis, is we have this low in frontal system right here, and then back behind it, which I believe we're going to see some severe weather with, we have this frontal system right there. So we have cold air advection going on here, weak cold air advection happening here. So as that storm develops, in the Caribbean, it's going to want to swoop this way. I know I'm using so much ink. Let me use a different color. It's going to want to come this way. Because you can see we have this frontal merger happening over the southeast. We quickly lose that frontal system. You can kind of track it here, and then you go forward a click or two, and you can track it right here. And then you go forward in time, you can track it to about right here, looking at that very weak precip band. So, I mean, with this front here and that one just upstream, it's going to have that weakness, as we always be calling, to head up towards the Florida Peninsula. So, Canadian model ensembles are continuously pumping something out. Both GFS ensembles and GFS deterministic are trying to, pop something up. So we have two models kind of in the same ballpark. We'll have to see if Euro can get on board. Euro has very faint whispers of it. Very, very faint. Like I said, I'm not using that to support this theory at all. But, I mean, it's something. It's something. It's not like I'm telling you guys all this and I have nothing there to, back it up with. And more so what I'm using realistically is I'm using the big picture pattern. I'm not talking about individual storms. We'll go back to this image here. I'm talking about all of this. I'm talking about the entire North American AOR and the Atlantic. That's the big thing. That's what's going to happen. We know that. The pattern's going to shift and it's going to kind of go upside down. And what was once helping us is going to, flip over and capsize, and it may be potentially harmful if we do get something to spin up, like some of the models are indicating. So we can check that box. We know the big picture pattern is going to change now in terms of the little guy if we're going to get the storm. Anytime you talk, it's always about hitting. If it's hypothetical, then stop hyping. If it's hypothetical, it's called forecasting. I'm just going to say it bluntly. Everything is hypothetical until it happens. And I'd rather forecast as opposed to nowcast. And I'd rather put it out and leave it out versus miss it and not have anything at all. The only hype I like is hypercoasters. Will we see rapid intensification if it hits the Gulf of Mexico? I don't think so, because as we just talking about, with all the cold air coming south and everything that's been happening synoptically speaking, we'll have a little bit more shear, a little bit cooler waters at the surface, a little bit of modified polar air that this storm will have to battle through. So, if we get a storm up there, it's also going to have to go back against that. So that's another thing too. I mean, some people are saying I'm hyping. Hyping would be, yes, hurricane, Cat 7, here it comes. Like, that's hyping, at least in my book. Right now, we're just talking about the possibilities, and I'm even downplaying it, saying it might not be that bad because of the different dynamics that would influence this track in the first place. Because with that jet comes shear, and with that cold air comes the dry air. So we already have those two oddities going against us, and I think that's why the last couple runs of the GFS, the ones we can have faith in, only have it forming up to like maybe a Cat 1, Cat 2 hurricane at best. And I can believe that. Because we still have pretty hot water, and, we're not into fall, winter time, so it's not like these fronts are going to have 50, 60-degree weather with them. We're talking modified polar air running across hotter terrain. We know that something's going to form in October. The question is when and where exactly, Robert. That's the big thing. We know what's happening in the large scale, and the thing is, we're waiting to see what the smaller scale looks like. It's kind of like playing a game of chess. You set the table and you get the pieces all lined up and you make your first moves. And what's happening is, because we're moving into October now, we're getting closer to fall, the pieces are starting to move and you're getting closer and closer to getting to that check and then checkmate. And right now we're kind of in, the pieces are moving, we're moving the pawns, we're setting things up, and check would be when the storm forms. Checkmate would be when we finally get an idea of where it's going. So we haven't gotten to that point in the game yet. Again, just using semantics and using examples for you guys to understand. It's kind of like we're going to get to first base. Let's put it that way for my sports fans out there. I'm not looking at any specific yard line. I'm looking at the end zone. And we're still on, first down and 10. And we just got the ball back, and we're going to start making our plays. And once we get to the end zone, that's when we have our system and we know what's happening. we're still in the very initial phases. We know that's something, Category 7 coming to North America, 965,000 miles wide. That's the day after tomorrow right there. Love watching Ryan Hall too, but David here has something unique about him and the way he talks about weather, plus a great sense of humor, can hold a conversation, sharing this way. That's the big thing. I'm very happy that you mentioned that is, I don't have a whole lot of experience. 10 years is, in reality, is not too much. Especially when it comes to weather, it's a constant learning curve. There's always something new to learn. The big thing is, I've had a lot of people say that it's cool to listen to talking and, listen to my personality, my charisma. I'm trying to be as modest about this as possible, guys. And so the reason I even took to YouTube is I decided to bite the bullet and just kind of connect with people. If I had that influence with my leadership in the military and just random passerbyers on the street, I figured why not get on social media and see if anybody, tags along for the journey. And that's been my favorite part about the whole thing is seeing the viewers and talking to you guys and having these conversations. That's why I decided to start Tropics Talk, as my subscribers count kept going up. Nice chess analogy. Thank you. Yeah, we're kind of playing a game. The larger pieces, the big picture's moving. We're coming up with a strategy, and we just got to wait for the bigger ones, the bigger players to start moving, and then we'll know exactly what the end game looks like. It's kind of like, as a matter of fact, Endgame. It's kind of like when Tony Stark was talking to Doctor Strange, and he'd mentioned how many possibilities involved us winning, and he does the one. And that's kind of where we're at right now. We have all these endless possibilities, and there's one example right here of it actually coming through. Haters suck, Nazar. Thank you for your service, my dude, and I enjoy watching your channel as well as others. Nothing but love here. George, thank you sincerely for that. I really mean that. Appreciate you. This guy nailed Hurricane Ian days before anyone else said it. Shit, hurricanes equal the beach. Definitely, I remember that. I definitely remember that. As a matter of fact, I was telling everybody at Crunch Kissimmee when I worked there that we got to close the gym down because Ian's coming. And they did, and the next thing you know, it came right through Central Florida. Oh, I seen the day after tomorrow, I cried. Yeah, it was an intense movie. If anything hits Florida, Miami will get rain, a storm. I'd have to pull an Andrew for my... Yeah, exactly. How far out does Tropical Tidbits water temperatures go? Let's see. I know we have some analysis charts here that we can look at. And we'll do a comparison too before we start wrapping up. We're coming up on the hour mark now, so we'll start to close out here very soon. But I'll do a side-by-side comparison. Here is our anomaly chart, and you can see all that upwelling that took place thanks to Hurricane Lee, and you can kind of almost get a little bit of a semblance of what Margot kind of did out there as well. So we're seeing some of the temperatures start to cool off a little bit. But then if you turn your attention over to our actual analysis chart, we still have, throughout all this general area, temperatures that would support development and intensification of a tropical system. We're at 82 degrees and up. We're not as erroneous as we were earlier in the year, but we still have the warm enough waters. Thank you for your service, bud. Keep it up. David, I really appreciate you, sir. Thank you very much. I was confused as Nazario said the high pressure would help it hit it directly. Wait, I was confused as Nazario said the high pressure would help it hit it directly. What do you mean digital dentistry? Rephrase that, please. Forget Waffle, I'll start panicking when the gym's close. Yeah. Ethan, are you talking about Ophelia here? Is this the storm you were referring to? When do you expect hurricane season to wrap up this year? It's really going to depend on how early October shakes out. Because last year, for example, we had a really, really quiet period, and then out of nowhere, Nicole decided to show up and be like, yo, we're not done yet. But before and after that, that was pretty much the end of it. So we'll really have to see what everything looks like during the first 2 weeks of October to make that announcement. Anything that has long hours or is 24/7 closed, I'll get worried. Yeah, that is true. But yeah, we're getting close to the end here, guys. If we have any additional questions, feel free to fire them out in the chat. Let me fix my camera. I'm slowly wandering off frame, I feel like. There we go. Why are you so hesitant on the GFS? If it did great on Lee, what have you done for me lately, we could say. Then if you want to talk about sport analogies. Yeah, the reason I'm iffy about the GFS is because we're still so far out. That's why I've been mentioning ensembles. Ensembles are very good with long-term, long range. That's why I've been mentioning Canadian, because even though we haven't seen an operational run predict a storm, the ensembles are consistently highlighting something, and the ensembles are far more accurate than our deterministic runs. Because what happens is, and I covered this in a video as well, deterministic models, or the operational runs of the GFS, Euro, etc., they only take into account the initial data that's plugged in for that run, and then they just go forward. They just go off. And after about the 5 to 7 day mark, because you're so far out in the future, those initial conditions start to kind of blur together. And you can kind of get anything out of it at that matter. And that's why on the GFS 18Z, even though it has that Cat 2 coming towards us, I don't buy it, because we're so far out, and we jumped from the 24th 4 days into the future. The 24th was no longer the big day, it was the 28th, so there's also that big discontinuity, so I don't trust it, I don't have a lot of faith. Ensemble members are like a huge working group of different people, if you will, for a model. And what happens is for each ensemble, the scientists or the analysts will put in specific data for each ensemble member, and they'll adjust it as they go through time. So that's why they're a lot better to use long term, because they have that, that representation, and they have those fine tweakings that will give us a decent amount of agreement as you go all the way through the 300 plus hours. Whereas our regular models, they only start at the very beginning, and then the further out you go, you lose accuracy because you're only taking into account that one piece of analysis data and stretching it over that length of time. What's your go-to model for the Tropics? You picked one. This year, I'll openly admit, I've liked the Canadian model. The Canadian model's done pretty good. For example, before, let's go back to the tropical AOR, and we'll do some compare and contrast. So if we go down to this here, if you go forward in time, we'll go back a couple days as well. We'll go to 12Z on Tuesday, for example. There goes Nigel taking shape and then moving off, and then take a look at Ophelia coming off the coastline right there. If you switch over to different models, like we'll go over to the Euro, see how it doesn't have anything out there? And then we'll go over to the GFS, doesn't have anything out there. And this is well, actually, no, we went back in time, excuse me. But see how the GFS doesn't have anything out there either, just like a weak little wave, and then it finally forms up way down into the period? The Canadian model's been very good with showing initial waves coming off of Africa and spinning up. It's also been very good with the ensembles and highlighting potential source regions. The Euro is good, but this year it really didn't do a whole lot to woo me over. The Canadian's been very good alongside the Icon in predicting formation and kind of carrying them through. Towards the latter parts of a storm's life cycle, it kind of falls apart, and that's when we'll want to use different model platforms than our high-res stuff, but I've liked the Canadian. It has a little bit of an edge for me, and I like to look at it because I trust it, and it's developed that trust since Idalia. Ethan was saying that Miami shouldn't get it right from a field, but I was confused. You said the high-pressure building would aid in my... No. The high-pressure building in would help if something to the south of Florida or just to the southeast of Florida came through. That would be why high pressure in the frontal systems would help guide it up towards us. But Ophelia is still way out there. We still have days before it comes off of Africa, so we don't know. Will AI take over weather forecasting? I hope not. Computers are getting way smarter now, so that's going to be a big thing. But as you can see, this year has been a very good example. Having that human eye, that human characteristic and adjustment there is crucial. So I don't think we're going to be completely phased out and obsolete through technology. Snow, score, Brad. One, if the storm dies from that is Hype Man, Brad. Gosh, unlimited power. Now we got Darth Sidious coming in here. What models for winter storms? I'm going against the grain here, and I actually like the NAM, the North American model for winter storms and synoptic features. Believe it or not, the NAM and the GFS are a lot better over North America when it comes to the wintertime. They're very good at picking up snowstorms and winter storms and jet streams, etc. What's the Korean model showing? Korean model's been acting up. On weathermodels.com, it's been off and on, even taking in data, so I'm not going to use that right now. The Korean model, I think we actually didn't even get 6 and 12Z, and it just barely made 18Z earlier. Brad, you take your 182 millibar hurricane to make it a scholarly all. What's the Kareem model show? Yeah. But all right, guys, we're going to get ready to end the stream. We're at that hour mark. Any additional questions? Digital dentistry, not right now, no. We have very split agreement with Ophelia. We'll have to see how the pattern shakes out and when this big blocking pattern can finally show itself. Lee and Nigel are going to be instigators of it, so in reality it'll be a matter of how strong Nigel gets and where he tracks and how much cold air influence he'll pick up and move with him. Blink 182 millibars, a new album, fire. Looking forward to the next video, man. When is it? Appreciate you, Clayton. It'll come out tomorrow around the same time. Saturday and Sunday we'll have updates. And I don't do Tropics talks over the weekend, so unless something big changes, then we'll do an on-the-fly Tropics talk. But as of right now, everybody, we're just going to take the weekend, kick it. I'll do some update videos for the channel, and we'll see what happens by Monday. We'll see if we have anything new to talk about. Super Charas, thank you. I agree, way too far out. We don't even have anything in the Atlantic yet developing. We go back to National Hurricane Center, and it's still not even out there yet. It's still well over Africa, and we can close out with that as well. We'll go to cyclonic weather, and we'll take a look at what Africa looks like. And that page isn't working. All right, let's go to tropical tidbits then. Let's go to Atlantic, and do they have an Africa AOY over here at all? Or no? Central Pacific. Here we go. We can look at this. So there's this guy. We're not really... NHC doesn't have that highlighted for development, and I can see why. It actually went south of the intertropical convergence zone. It's moving into the southern hemisphere, so we're not going to get anything out of that. There's this big whopper Independence Day style wave coming off. I don't know if that's Ophelia. Maybe in the works, but let's take a look at the timing real quick, because that thing looks massive. Let's go over here, forecast models. We'll use the icon in this case. We'll go real zoomed into the tropical Atlantic, and let's see. It's getting ready to come off the coast, so we could see development right there. That's Wednesday. I don't... maybe coming off Africa by early Sunday, Monday, then starts to make its way off. That could be Ophelia back over here somewhere. I mean, that leading edge seems a little too close. I feel like by the time we get into tomorrow and Sunday, it'll be over open water. So I think Ophelia is still back behind this big conglomeration of a mess. But we'll see. You are my favorite of weather guys to follow. Thank you, Digital Dentistry. I appreciate that. Zenful, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, just go with the flow until more comes out. Exactly, that's what we're doing right now. We're just, following the breadcrumbs, picking up the puzzle pieces, and trying to decipher them as best as we can. Looks like a sunspot shooting out kind of. Yeah, that thing's massive. If you guys have ever seen the movie Independence Day, it kind of looks like one of those spaceships coming off Africa. Actually, you take a look at depression number 15, and it's already moving off in this direction. In the last couple of frames, it goes from here to here, so we're already seeing that northwestward track. Pretty cool. So would you say that Miami is in pretty good prospects? For right now, just for the sake of your sanity, I would say absolutely. In fact, let's all take advantage of this cooler weather that we're going to have coming on through once we get this frontal system through us. It'll be a nice break from all the hot temperatures. I'll probably get outside and finally get to work on my cars again. Dark Earth, I appreciate you. Have a great... Watch the movie Hellhole. Okay, I'll have to remember that. I'll have to make a note of that. Hellhole. Let me write that down. I still have my pen here, but Hellhole. I'll remember that. But yes, digital dentistry, I'm looking right at you. You're fine. You're fine. We actually have great weather on its way here over the next few days for Florida, so we just got to get through the initial wave of thunderstorm activity with that frontal system getting pulled south. So we'll see an increase in the bad weather, and then it'll go away. So you can see here we have thunderstorm coverage with that system popping up, and then it'll start to clear itself out until that next system can start acting up. And then there it is. There's the frontal system pushing through. We'll get a little bit of residual moisture over South Florida because that's where it goes stationary, and then we start to see that next system develop off the coast and pick up the thunderstorm activity, but it'll still cool off. Windy temp model. I'll remember that for next time, Ethan. We're going to go ahead and start calling it off now. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on Monday for the next 8 p.m. Tropics talk. Unless something big changes, I don't foresee it changing. If anything worth mentioning comes up, I'll definitely put it into a video so you guys can refer back to that. But in the meantime, yeah, if you guys don't have any further questions, I really hope you have a great rest of your Friday night. Thanks for taking the time out of your evenings to spend some time with me and talk Tropics. It's been an absolute pleasure to have everybody, as always. All right, Nancy, thank you as well. Thank you for coming in. Nancy number 2, of course. Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Great job. J-Ski, I appreciate that. Brad, take it easy, and I genuinely mean this. Thanks for coming over to the light side. I was a little nervous about all the hype chatter that was going on initially, if you're still there, but I appreciate you coming around. That means a lot. And thanks, everybody, for watching. You know the old saying. This is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.